Alright, Stallions, I'm going to go ahead and go over the task cards that you had on Monday and Tuesday to complete. They're not due until Thursday before the test, so please take advantage of watching this video to help clarify any questions that you have. So let's go and start with number one. Number one, listen and explain at least 3 of George Washington's presidents during the early Republic era. So I have to think. Precedence means setting the example for future presidents. So George Washington was our very first president in this early Republic era. Now he had to set the stage up for every president that's going to follow. So some of the precedents, meaning some of the examples that he set up for future presidents, they're a lot. So let me go ahead and list a couple. One of them, he created a cabinet. Again, a cabinet is a group of advisors that help the president do his job. Another precedent that we can go ahead and say is that George Washington also does an oath of office. So whenever a president is elected, they go ahead and do that oath, their inauguration speech as well. Another precedent is their farewell address. Every president, whenever they step down, they do address the country in a farewell address. Another precedent is George Washington set the example or precedent to only serve 2 terms as a president. And then another example could be George Washington also set the precedent on how strong the federal government needed to be. So that was more than 3. You just have to list 3 and just explain why. Number 2, explain what George Washington's main challenge was when he took office. How would he try to solve these issues? So Washington stepped into office. It was not a clean slate. We just fought for our independence. We ended up winning, so wars cost money. So the war that we just got out of was the American Revolution. So his biggest challenge is that this brand new country is in extreme debt. And that is his main challenge that he's going to be presented with. And how would he try to solve these issues? He's going to look to his cabinet, specifically the Secretary of Treasury, which is Hamilton. And he's going to look to Hamilton to figure out some economic plans that's going to get him out of debt. Number 3, what are the 2 political parties that formed inside of Washington's cabinet? Explain their differences in political views. So, although George Washington's the only president in history that did not identify as a specific political party, he was very neutral. He did have the creation of the first political parties happen underneath his cabinet. So first you have the Federalists, which were ran by Hamilton. And then you have the Democratic Republicans, which leader for the most part was Jefferson. So if I'm explaining their differences in their political views, there's many. For example, Federalists believe in a strong national central federal government. They believe that they should have most of the power in the country. Now, Democratic Republicans think that the power should lie with more of the states and the common man, the common people, not a big federal government. They want a limited government. Next one, for example, their economy. So Hamilton and the Federalists thought that our economy would thrive off of factories, industrialization. When the Democratic Republicans thought the opposite, they thought that agriculture would better fit the needs of our economy. If I'm looking at how they read the Constitution, Federalists read it very loose. If it wasn't specifically in the Constitution, but it was necessary for our country to prosper, they thought that it should be included. So again, loose interpretations, when the Democratic Republicans were the opposite. They had a strict interpretation. If it's in the Constitution, you can do it. If it's not in the Constitution, you can't. Reading it black and white. Federalists are for high tariffs and Democratic Republicans are not for high tariffs. Federalists believe that our allegiance should lie with England, Britain, when the Democratic Republicans sought France. So all of those are just examples. You don't have to list every single one, but just a couple of them. So let's go ahead and talk about number 4. Explain Hamilton's economic plans. How did each of them help stabilize our economy? So again, we're in extreme debt because of the American Revolution, so Hamilton's going to come up with 3 main points. 1, create a national bank. That's like his baby. 2, go ahead and tax. We need tax to go ahead and create revenue to better our economy. So he's going to say tax whiskey. And then the last one is protective tariffs. So tax on imported goods. The bank was needed because we didn't have a single currency. We didn't have anywhere to house our money as on a federal level. So the national bank was needed to stabilize our country so we can have somewhere to put our money as a nation, and also we have somewhere to take out loans as a nation as well. The whiskey tax specifically, a lot of people were against it because it only taxed majority of the farmers, so it seemed like it was targeted. But also it helped stabilize our economy because we need to create revenue so we could try to get out of debt, so taxes are needed. And then the last one is protective tariffs. If we tax imported goods higher than domestic goods, or domestic goods are not taxed, have that additional tax, American factories are going to benefit from that. So that's going to help our economy because now Americans are more likely to buy in-house in the nation domestically. Okay, number 5. One of Washington's presidents was that every president should have a farewell address. Explain Washington's 3 warnings to the early republic. So that is a precedent. Every president should have a farewell address. Now, Washington, knowing that we were a brand new country, wanted to give us warnings, and he gave us 3 specific ones. 1, stay away from foreign allegiances. 2, avoid national debt. And then 3, no political parties. Now, the national debt, of course, we're a brand new nation. We don't want to be in debt, especially to any other countries. Next one, political parties. Although the Federalists and Democratic Republicans were formed underneath his watch, his cabinet, he was completely against that. He thought that you should not be divided within a country, so political parties were no-go. And then the last one was no more foreign allegiances. You don't want to create divide, or you don't want to stick with one person because that's going to cause problems. And as a brand new country, you should just worry about yourself. So those are the 3 main warnings. Number 6. And also, I apologize, before I go to 6, he also believed in neutrality, staying neutral, because that actually brings us to number 6, which is explain what staying neutral means and why our nation should follow this advice. So again, neutral means that you are not choosing a side. You're not going to be biased. You are going to see points of view from both perspectives. Now, the reason why Washington advised on this and why our country should follow this is because you should see a situation through both lenses, both perspectives. You should not choose one or be biased, especially as a brand new country. You shouldn't start choosing sides right away. And there's a lot more to that one as well. That question's very broad. So if you did not specifically say that, that's okay. As long as it's in the realm of staying neutral and why that's a positive thing for our nation, you're good. That brings me to number 7. Explain the significance of the XYZ affair and during Adams' presidency. So again, Adams is our 2nd president of the United States. He is a Federalist. He followed after George Washington. So he was met with a foreign event, a foreign affair, which was the French. France is supposed to be our allies, but we do get in a kind of a disagreement with them. So instead of going to war, Adams sends a representative to go talk to France. But as soon as that representative goes, he's met with 3 agents, which are X, Y, and Z. Now, these 3 agents are going to tell this representative to pay a bribe and a loan just to go ahead and talk to the prime minister. So this shows that they don't respect us as a new country because they think that we're going to pay a bribe and a loan, which is kind of like disrespectful. So instead of Adams paying that bribe and loan, they went ahead and removed themselves from the situation. And Adams, knowing that we were not ready for war, went ahead and just stepped out and just said, no war, we'll go ahead and just stay away from them. So this actually showed us that foreign affairs, that foreign allegiances, George Washington was warning us about this. And this was actually one of the knocks on Adams' presidency because a lot of people saw this as a weak a weak position that the United States took because we did not want to go to war with them after they disrespected us. But again, Adams was thinking for the betterment of the country, we were not ready to go to war. So that brings me to the next event in Adams's presidency. Explain the impact of the Alien and Sedition Act. So now that the country is unsettled because of the XYZ affair, you have a bunch of people that are talking bad not only about the government, but also Adams himself. So Congress passes these two laws, the Alien and Sedition Act. These acts are directly affecting people's First Amendment right, but it's to stop people from talking negatively about the government and our President Adams himself. Now, the Alien Act was more so for immigrants. So if they would caught conspiring, oh my goodness, can't say that, sorry, against the government or talking negatively against the government, then they could get deported or kicked out of the country. The Sedition Act was more so for citizens. If they talk bad against their country, they can actually be punished in some kind of fine. They can even be put in jail. So these two acts really hindered the First Amendment right. Number 9, explain the impact that happened during the election of 1800s. So the election of 1800s was very significant because we were able to transfer power from Adams to Jefferson. Now, this was a Federalist Adams going to a Democratic Republican, which is Jefferson. Now, although we have elections all the time, places in this world, the transition of power, whenever it goes from one person to the next, it could be chaotic. It could be make the public unrest. They could start to rebel. They could start to boycott. Now, this was the first time in American history where we had such an event switching from one political party to the next. So the reason why this is so significant is because it was very peaceful. The transition from a Federalist Party to a Democratic Republican, Adams to our third president, Thomas Jefferson, it was very peaceful. There was not rebellions. There was not any negative things that transpired. So this was actually a very peaceful event that showed our nation that we can go ahead and move forward without hindering or acting up. So that brings me to 10. Explain Thomas Jefferson, again, our third president, Democratic Republican views. So again, Democratic Republicans are opposite of the Federalist Party. Democratic Republicans like a limited government. They read the Constitution very strictly. If it's in there, it's good to go. If it's not in the Constitution, it's unconstitutional. Next one, they believe that our economy would thrive from an agriculture economy. So a majority of their followers, the people that supported them, were people generally in the South and interior of America, typically farmers and labor workers. Those people supported them the most. They also thought that their allegiances should lie with France. They also believed in low tariffs because they export goods and they don't want to pay that additional tax. So these are the democratic views that Thomas Jefferson has, and his views are going to be challenged with this domestic event, which is number 11, the Louisiana Purchase. So number 11 is just that. What year was the Louisiana Purchase made? And why is it so important to claim this territory? Now, the Louisiana Purchase is one of the 6 years you have to remember, 1803. The reason why it's so important to claim this territory is because, one, it's going to double our size. More land equals more powers. We want to expand westward. This is the way to go. Also, we want the Mississippi River. That's the very first thing we wanted. We didn't even want the whole Louisiana territory at first. We just wanted the port of New Orleans because it did feed, or the Mississippi River did feed into that port. So we wanted that access to trade, the access from the Gulf of Mexico to export goods. So that was why it was so important to claim that territory. More land, also access to that river that's going to have access to trading routes, traveling purposes, resources. So that brings us to 12. Explain what the two major benefits of claiming that the Louisiana territory. So I already mentioned the two. One, double the size of America. 2, control the Mississippi. So as I stated in number 11, we want to double the size because more territory. Jefferson's goal to expand westward, this is the way to go. And this is going to challenge Jefferson's morals because he believes in a strict interpretation of the Constitution. It's not in the Constitution that he could purchase this land, but he knows that he needs to do it. So he makes the deal anyways. And also the second part, the Mississippi River. That is what's most important to our country. We need access to that river for trade purposes to help our economy. So that is one of the main purposes for purchasing that land. That brings me to number 13. Now that we have purchased the Louisiana Territory in 1803, we now need to chart that unmanned land, that uncharted land. So Jefferson entrusts Lewis and Clark. Their main mission is to, 1, chart that uncharted territory to go ahead and map it out. 2, they also need to find a water route to the Pacific Ocean. So their job is that as well. Also, another job is to start to make some good rapport, friendly relationships with the native people, the Native Americans, the indigenous people. These are their missions, and they're hoping that Lewis and Clark can go ahead and be successful in this, and which they are very extremely successful because they do have help of a Native American named Sacagawea. That brings me to 14. Explain the influence of, how did Washington influence presidents like John Adams and Jefferson? So Adams and Jefferson are going to be met with foreign and domestic affairs. Washington's going to set some precedents and some warnings towards that. So, for example, if I think of Washington, I think of his farewell address. I think of avoid foreign allegiances, avoid debt, and avoid political parties. So Adams, one way that Washington influenced him was that XYZ affair. That foreign party, France, Washington warned them to stay against that, to stay neutral, to go ahead and avoid such affairs. And Adams was influenced by that because after the XYZ affair, he went ahead and stepped back because he knew that was better for the country. So that's one way that he influenced him. Also, another way that Washington influenced Jefferson was probably like the economy. Washington wanted a economy that would thrive. Jefferson did as well. Also, if I think about foreign affairs, I think about the Embargo Act that Jefferson went through. So the Embargo Act, again, is whenever America stayed neutral in the war between France and Britain. So they decided to end all trade with all foreign nations. So Washington warned the country about foreign allegiances. So Jefferson was influenced by that thought and went ahead and took America out of trading with any foreign country because we wanted to avoid that. So the Embargo Act is a perfect example of Jefferson trying to listen to Washington and avoid dealing with foreign nations. Now, number 15 lists at least one domestic and one foreign event that happened during Washington, Adams, and Jefferson's presidency. So Washington, I could think domestic events, meaning home. Whiskey Rebellion, that was a good one because you had the farmers in the South that rebelled against this whiskey tax. So Washington had to show how strong our government was. So that was a domestic event. If I'm thinking about foreign affairs, I'm thinking about Washington's farewell address, which is saying avoid foreign allegiances. So that's a foreign event. If I'm thinking about Adams' foreign event, I'm thinking about XYZ affair because that had to deal with the nation of France. And we had that dilemma. Domestic events for Adams, that would be the Alien and Sedition Act. Whenever those laws were passed by Congress to go ahead and suppress the First Amendment right or their thoughts of the First Amendment rights. And then that leaves us with Jefferson. So Jefferson's domestic event could be the Louisiana Purchase. I could almost debate that that's foreign as well because we did make that deal with France. But domestically, we went ahead and doubled the size of America. And then also, if I look at foreign events, that would be for Jefferson, the Embargo Act, because we stopped trades with all foreign countries. So that's another example for a foreign event for Jefferson. Foreign and domestic. Okay. that leads me to my last one. So this is a political cartoon. If I read the title, it says Bottling Up the Whiskey Rebellion. 16. Analyze and explain what happened in this political cartoon. List at least 3 details in your pictures for your answers. So if I break this apart, let me go ahead and change the color real quick. I'm going to look at the title, Whiskey Rebellion. So I know that the president that was in office during the Whiskey Rebellion was Mr. George Washington. So this gentleman right here is just that. He is George Washington. Change the color. Okay, so Washington, if I look in his bottle, it says no whiskey tax. It says Pennsylvania whiskey. It also gives the year. I also see the Constitution right here as well. So if we analyze this picture, it doesn't look like Washington's happy. So inside the bottle, he seems like he's closing it up. He's stopping it from spilling out. He is making sure that he has the authority. He has the power to make sure nothing spills out. So inside, it says no whiskey tax. So I believe, or we can go ahead and analyze that this is representing the farmers inside that bottle, the farmers that are rebelling against this whiskey tax in Pennsylvania. And Washington is keeping it together. He's not letting it spill out. Because prior experiences during the Shays Rebellion, farmers also, an event led by Daniel Shay, they took over half the state. So Washington's not going to let that happen again because now he has the Constitution that backs him up. So that's the other part of this political picture. Underneath the Constitution, which George Washington in this political cartoon has underneath his hands, he is going to show that the federal government is too strong to be messed with. He is setting the precedent that this will never happen underneath the Constitution, our new law of the land after the Articles of Confederation. So I love this political cartoon. It shows a lot. You have to analyze it. So I listed several ways that you could have used details from this picture in your answer. So again, it's a good picture. All right, guys. Hopefully this is going to help you out. I apologize I've been gone the last 2 days. I've been in training. Please watch this if you need to. Tell your also other Rosolians to please take advantage of this. You're going to be turning in these task cards tomorrow on Thursday before the test. So make sure that you have those ready to turn in. If you have any questions, please email me. Hopefully this helped you out. Please rewind to any section that you need if needed. All right, guys. Have a great day. Bye.